Thanks, Sean. Thanks for the invitation. It's great to be here today. So I was looking very carefully at the list of topics of the Olympiad, and there was no biophysics. But this is a very important topic in the current world. AI, all these new materials, apart from medicine, all these things are related to the interface between physics and biology. And I'm going to give you a summary of, first, history, why physicists do biology at all, and why so many of us are increasingly doing that. And then a little bit of the big landscape of this intersection between physics, biology, and nanotechnology. Then I will end up with a little bit of AI, how AI emerges also from physics ideas. And I will finish a little bit with my work, so you see the sort of things I do in the lab, and maybe we can discuss that later during the tea break. Okay, so it's very difficult to define things, and I usually don't recommend it. One way of stopping thinking is, okay, physics is what physicists do, which I think is a good definition, because as you heard before, there's all sorts of ways of looking at the world. But I'm going to launch you one definition, which is something I think brings us all together. Physics is about reality, understanding the reality around us. And at some point in modern physics, 17th century and even before, people started to realize something very interesting, not only physics, but the whole world during the Enlightenment, that there was something very important about human reason. Is the idea that, okay, we live in a chaotic world. You look out of the windows, lots of things going on, especially if you go to nature. But there's something mysterious about reason which allows you to predict things that will happen in the future. This is not a small thing. It means the world is not totally chaotic, and there's something intrinsic in the human capacity to look at the world that allows us to predict certain phenomena. Imagine the first person that just looking predicted the first eclipse or the first satellite that would come. And it was just based on observation, reasoning, and something that is outside of reason. Something we use a lot in physics, which is the mystery intuition. Something that is not really related to logic, and that you develop in a mysterious way by doing experiments, talking to others. We were hearing before about solving problems together, talking to others, interiorizing the problems, and suddenly, bang, you start to understand something. So physics emerges in that interface between, experiments, intuition, and reason, and has this third big thing. Once you know you can predict something in time, you can start producing technology based on those ideas. Fun is important because you know it's going to work all the time. So reason allows you to make machines that are also predictable in time. And this has transformed the world. Physics, from the atomic bomb to your mobile phones, to the energy, to everything around us, has created technology based on these ideas. Logical or less logical ideas that come from the physics department. But there's something fundamentally, at least in the technology we've done in the 21st century, which is based on reason. I have an idea, I make a device, I fabricate the device, that device works. I think I'm going to show you how these things are changing now. And in all this, up to the 21st, actually after the invention of the computer, this is the way physics very much work. Intuition, logic, equations, making things. But and it was trying to get from the complexity of the world the simple ideas that would allow us to understand reality, transform reality. But with the invention of the computer, things shift. And this is something I'm going to show you today. Because this is the moment where physics start looking at the physics of complexity. We heard before from this company that is sponsoring, I don't remember the name, G something. that they are using complex mathematical models to look at complex systems and finance, right? So this is a match of what physics does today. not looking at the things you just can solve with the equations, but it has got even more complicated because now we can access big models, big data, and use everything at the same time. Intuition, logic, computers, and teams working together. So in the 21st century, physics reaches biological complexity. And by doing that, we start looking at biology in a different way. We start to have not only the tools to interrogate biology, but the capacity to make those models that identify what is predictable in biology or not, that goes beyond the gene and the protein, this molecular biology, as I will tell you a little bit now. And of course, is the big questions, intelligence, right? Which is what is always been the quest of physics in the end. How do we understand the world around it? How can we understand it? What is the nature of intelligence? And this is the reason that from the early beginning, I put very old microscopes that were developed 300 years ago, 17th century microscopes, where the first thing people did was, one, turn the telescope to the sky. Where are we? And the second is to turn the microscope to the living system. So it was a physicist, Robert Hooke, who identified the cells. And this is a slide that I want to discuss with you because maybe it's more useful than the rest of my talk. It's a bit of the history of physics on the 20th century at the top, and how so this story arrived to not only nanotechnology, but where we are today, to the complex system physics. So the bottom part, the top part, pretty much a bit of summary of physics. The bottom part, mathematics. So 20th century starts 1905 with Einstein, the first special theory of relativity. And soon the world is not what it looks. Time is not what it looks like, and space is not what people were thinking before the 20th century. And the biggest next revolution was quantum mechanics. When people started to do experiments to break the atom, or not only to break the atom, it was also the diffusion, etc., and light, they started to think that reality was not how we are used to have it in our daily life experience. When you go to very small very small sizes, physics changes, reality becomes somehow incomplete. Things are not continuous, energies are not continuous, they're jumps. The reality is somehow incomplete and has strange consequences for time. Time also may not necessarily fall forward. We know these strange effects of entanglement where things happen. You can know something happening in the other end of the universe, but some information that you learn or where you are. There's no intuition for quantum mechanics in the classical sense. At the same time as these guys were breaking down the intuition of physics up to then, mathematicians were doing something very similar. So we know Gödel and the incompleteness theorems. If you never heard about this guy before, this is a very important guy in the history of mathematics and the history of computing. He was very good friends with Einstein and all the quantum theorists. And he was the first one to demonstrate that there's a problem with logic. When you try to understand the world with logic, which is what we try to do in physics, we find certain solutions, but he found in the incompleteness theorems that a system, when you study mathematics, arithmetics, and so on, you can follow a logical path, and all the solutions you get there are either right, complete, or complete, but you can't have both things at the same time. It's a bit of a mathematical realization of something we know in real life. Two very logical arguments can reach very different conclusions, and you cannot decide just by logic if something is true or not. These ideas got them all very worried about the nature of reality. How can we learn anything about the world with quantum mechanics, with general relativity? Logic has limits. And here came Alan Turing. And Alan Turing they were all talking to each other. And especially during the Manhattan Project, when they were all got together to make the atomic bomb, many of these people got together, and in the free time when they were not making bombs, they were worried about this. And also, Alan Turing was the one that proposed the idea of the first computer, the Turing machine. Basically, the idea was create a machine that allows us to know or solve algorithmic processes. But by doing that, what you learn is not only what parts of nature you can turn into algorithms, but they were also very interested in the other part. What part of nature is outside logic, outside the algorithm? These things and these ideas started to develop after the Manhattan Project. These guys got together. Here I have a picture of John von Neumann with Feynman. They were talking a lot, and they made the first digital computer with von Neumann architecture. There was a couple of machines made before. It's around 1945. And it was put in the project together with the first proposal to make the hydrogen bomb. After the war, Edward Teller said, oh, we better get quick, otherwise the Russians will make it. And so they make the first computer. And as soon as they make the first computer, von Neumann and all these guys, and they were in Princeton, maybe you've seen a bit of this in the movie Oppenheimer, all these characters are there talking to each other. The first problems they start looking at is solving the problems of complexity. They start to looking at the weather, at flocks of birds. It was also the time around that of course Rosalind Franklin, Watson and Crick were also applying physics to get the structure of DNA. It's very interesting how all these ideas started to get entangled during this time, and the first sort of biologist that discovered this molecular biology paradigm, who was Delbruck, was a student of Bohr and also of Planck, and he moved from quantum physics to biology, and he proved for the first time that there was a relation between gene and evolution. His ideas came from quantum mechanics, and his ideas were popularized by Schrödinger, another of the big guys of quantum mechanics, in his famous lectures that then turned into a book, What is Life? This is the moment where physicists start worrying about the code of life, the information that is important to create life, how to understand the world through biological intelligence. And it's very interesting because this is what also inspired Watson and Crick and Rosalind Franklin to start looking for the code of life and so on. And all these ideas of the Turing also came to biology, this idea that there's some kind of information encoded in DNA that could allow us to solve the problem of biology. Of course, this is a very oversimplification, but it's become the dominant paradigm since then, since the 1950s. This is what we call molecular biology, also very related to physics. I could expand this slide to the bottom, that sometimes I do, but it becomes very slow, with neuroscience. At the same time as these guys were doing quantum mechanics, these guys were worrying about how to make a machine that is logical and not logical. Santiago Ramón y Cajal in Spain was the first one that realized that the brain was made out of individual neurons and neural networks. After the Spanish Civil War, war is very important in this story. All these Europeans had to go to the US, to the Manhattan Project, and it was getting them together there that brought us the first computers. And the Spanish students of Ramón y Cajal also had to go to the US because of the Spanish Civil War. Out of this mixture of ideas came the first idea of cybernetics, of which von Neumann was very interesting. Cybernetics was about how, with neural networks, or how living organisms, understanding information from the outside world and creating feedback loops and feed-forward loops, we're starting to understand the world around it. This is still now the quest of artificial intelligence. Two students of these guys, I was telling you about McCulloch and Pitts, proposed the artificial neural networks, which we are starting to get successfully used now in the 1950s in this time. So although at university, we have now separated all these fields between molecular biology, physics, computer science, AI, at the beginning of the 20th century, they emerged from a same intellectual milieu. And many of the ideas actually came from the European Enlightenment. They were very, very influenced by the ideas about consciousness of Husserl and Heidegger and so on. So even though we think Biology and physics are very separated. They've always been, joined at the hip, I would say. And in the middle of this, Richard Feynman in the 1960s, there is a famous lecture, you may have heard of it. There's plenty of room at the bottom, which was not a lecture he prepared, it was just something he started thinking loud. He started thinking, okay, so now imagine when we actually reach, with technology, the capacity to manipulate matter like biology does. They were starting to learn how biology was making proteins and DNA. And then some new big science will come out. So that's the idea of nanotechnology, to start to thinking. When we learn from biology to make things like biology does, we have an endless way of making things. Okay. So this is a bit of summary of all the ideas of all these big guys. When we go to university, we have to pass exams, and somehow these ideas never reach us because we just need to learn the basics. But what motivated all these guys was materials, energy, what is human intelligence, where do we come from, and what can we learn with logic and without logic. Okay, so it's very interesting that in the 1980s, humans start from all fields, reach the nanoscale. So some examples, 1980s, fullerene, Harry Kroto here, and others, Smiley, get the fullerenes. People start able to synthesize nanomaterials. Very interesting. This guy, Seaman, who was a student of the guy that was working with Crick to make the structures of DNA, he could not get his X-ray diffraction working and so on, and start thinking of DNA not as some genetic code for life, but actually that you could use the bits of DNA to create a Lego, a nano DNA. He's the inventor of DNA nanotechnology. I will talk later if someone is interested in it. This is a field that now is quite big. There are scientists all over the world, some of us in the Department of Physics at Oxford, making stuff with DNA, trying to learn from biology how biology builds things to create all sorts of structures. It was also the time, and this is where I started, where the first microscopes able to see atoms were invented. These are the scanning probe microscopes. These are images of a scanning tunneling microscope that uses a very sharp tip and the quantum current that jumps from the tip to the sample, the tunneling current. When you get very close, but not quite touching, to image surfaces with piezoelectric devices. I heard before some piezoelectric devices, so we use them here. And to make the first images of atoms that we ever got. So the background here is copper, and these guys evaporated some iron on top, and they used the tip not only to see by scanning the tip at the surface, but to pick up the atoms and to create a circle. This is one of the first times, because these guys were doing it a lot, that humans created something using atoms one by one. It's not a practical way of doing anything, although the Chinese are now trying to use this for computers. We can discuss that later. But it's a realization that we can do it. And if you see, there is a ripple in the middle. So this is a bit, for me, a metaphor of how we interact in many ways with nature physicists. We make a circle, very simple, with our Lego blocks. But somehow nature always replies with a very complex answer. We can never separate a human simplicity for the complexity of nature. So these are the electrons trapped inside the circle, making this behaving like a fluid. Nothing to do with the particles, a beautiful realization of the effects you get in quantum mechanics. And this field, of course, then get a lot of Nobel Prizes and so on in chemistry and all this, and actually set the foundation for now the Taiwan Semiconductor Company is able to make transistors that are 2 nanometers thick. So very much these techniques allow physicists to figure out what happens, very tedious, hard work. Someone said before, we had to throw balls against something for hours, and we were right. Well, that's science, and instead of hours, months, or even years, and sometimes it works, like you said before. So anyway, and I come from the generation that thought, all right, so now we have these microscopes that allows us to see these boring atoms. So what if we put them in water and we start looking at proteins, at DNA? Because biology makes somehow much more clever nanomachines than all these triangles and circles that we make. What does biology do? This was my motivation to go into this field. And when I moved into this field, late 1990s, early 2000s, we had the books with all these pictures of protein. This is a protein, this is a, and cartoons. I was in Japan at the time. One would think of science is that you can travel a lot, and I used to like that a lot. I did my PhD there. And I met this guy, Hiroyuki Noji. Japan at the time was very good at this business, looking at biological nanomachines. So he was the first one to demonstrate the rotation of the ATP synthase. And I'm going to tell you what is this, because at least you should learn this, apart from in this talk. You see this bit, this drawing here. This is the drawing that the Nobel Prize winners made about the ATPs. They got a Nobel Prize in 1997, Paul Boyer and John Walker in Cambridge, Hughes Guy in Denmark in August. So this thing is tiny. It's a nanomachine, 20, 30 nanometers across. And it's sitting in the cell membranes of your cells. And look how it works. It has, between the outside of the cell and the inside of the cell, there's a voltage drop. Something we still cannot do with our batteries, this wonderful voltage drop. And the cell is able to maintain perfectly, in order to have energy to power stuff. So this thing is sitting there. There is this voltage drop, and the voltage drop makes protons inside the cell to cross this bit. Now, this bit, you see the shape, very geometrical, very beautiful, rotates like a windmill, right? So the mechanics of the thing is made so when the protons go through, it rotates. And then that rotation translates here and moves these bits at the top. So these bits are able to grab an ADP molecule. In every, your body is at 37 degrees. So your molecules at the nanoscale need a little bit of energy to go over the noise signal. And you get that from ATP, this molecule of energy. So when you hydrolyze one of these phosphates, you get a little bit of energy and you can move things. But then you need to make it back. And this is how biology does it. One of these things grabs an ADP molecule, and with the energy of this rotation, bends it. That bending bends the molecular orbital, means that chemical reactions happen without almost any energy. So it's a perfect catalyst. Plus, this thing rotates, so it just churns and churns and churns ATP. And you need it because young people like you need about 60 kilograms a day of ATP turnover. So you have millions and millions of these nanomachines in your whole body making this stuff. Now, when you look at this and then you think, and these triangles I showed you before, it's like, oh, wow, I'm going to move to this field. So my first interest was a bit trying to understand how biology engineer these things. And with our microscopes, we could see the things not as cartoons, but as actually moving. This is from an atomic force microscope in my lab long time ago, where we started to see the capacity to see how biology does it. I haven't done something funny. Okay. And to tell you how biology does it, I'll show you another example. So this is the ATPs I told you before that we could see with an AFM, with an atomic force microscope, and we could study the physics of what had happened. And you see one thing here with two legs walking down the track? That is another what we call linear motor. You also have this protein all over your body. Hearing, any extension of muscles, any movement of your cells needs this walker. This is myosin walking on a tubulin track. and an actin tract, actually. So we have a lot of cables inside the cell, like this tract, and they are negatively charged. And these things sit on top because they're slightly positively charged. And the mechanical design is such that when the environment, very hot water, 37-degree water, shakes it, use that to move forward. And by doing that, first of all, it can carry things inside the cell. The cell is not a fluid. It's really packed of stuff, so you need clever things. And also, it can pull muscles, all sorts of amazing capacities. And then from the philosophical perspective, there's also something very interesting. This is how, in a chaotic world, biology, life is able to produce purpose just with your geometry. Just with the geometry of your shape, you can have one direction. So it's also foundationally important for, trying to understand what we understand the world. And of course, another of the interesting things that worries me now, and if I have time, I go back in the end, is this idea that biology, like in the early people of quantum mechanics, sits in that nanoscale which goes between the quantum world and the world of general relativity. And there's always been a thought from the beginning of quantum mechanics, we can discuss that later if you're interested, it started by many, like Schrödinger or Hermann Weyl or many others, that the biology is able to somehow tap into the quantum world in order to process information in a way that is not algorithmic. I told you at the beginning, there is this idea that we can learn about the world through logic, but we also use intuition, a bit like conscious of Freud, right? So we can have a conscious language-directed thought, but there's something underneath that we don't really control, and that might be related to quantum mechanics. Okay, faster into this. So I already told you about Rosalind Franklin and Watson and Crick and how the physicists also discovered DNA. So in the 1990s, many of the physicists that were starting to go into the nano world to study biology started to think that we could create bullets to target diseases in a way that traditional pharmacology could not do. Traditional pharmacology was based into this molecular biology paradigm of the 1950s in which, when you're ill, either a protein or a DNA or something is malfunctioning, then you bring a drug and you stop it, and then you cure the disease. Very linear, very rational. And the biologists have this very digital vision of biology. As what I showed you before, things moving, rotating, has an interesting characteristic, which is digital in the sense that only one protein binds another protein, or that the protein is made by a specific sequence that is digital, but it works in analog. It works by movement, electricity, force. And I didn't realize at the time, but the physicists, we were interested in the analog, and the biologists were interested in the digital. So there was a big mismatch, still is, of how we look at biology. And thinking in analog, physicists thought we can target tumors. And this was the beginning of nanomedicine. A lot of work in progress, we can discuss maps. It's the idea that you can make nanoparticles by physical properties reach tumors and then release drugs that then they will act more digitally. So it's bringing these ideas of shape, electricity, mechanics, together with targeting with molecules to medicine. Others, we were interested in sensing, not only with microscopes, with detecting viruses or detecting bacteria and so on, using our capacity to measure in the nanoscale. This is the big field of nanosensors, although, when the pandemic came, we had none of this, and we had to go back to boring PCR, so still work in progress, another exciting area. Let me start something that I think is revolutionary, and it will change the world in your lifetime. A few years ago, I think 2 years ago, Last Nobel Prize. Last Nobel Prize in I think was medicine, was given to David Baker, and also the group of AlphaFold that were able to predict protein structures. Why is this important? Because knowing the protein structure, many people think we can create drugs and so on, and it's an extremely difficult mathematical problem. David Baker solved it first, and solved it with very clever ideas, taking into account the evolutionary history of the protein. And DeepMind, so AlphaFold, managed to solve it later using AI. The interesting thing is not just only that they're very useful for maybe still work in progress, it has problems, to make drugs and so on. But for me, the key is that these guys, David Baker, started to do the problem in reverse, creating proteins that don't exist in nature. So they went to the computer and designed these proteins, and then designed the genes and put them into bacteria and yeast to produce proteins that don't exist in nature. It was difficult, trial and error. But eventually they make these proteins, and they design them so that they could assemble into more complicated structures. This is a radically new and different way of fabricating anything like we have done before in the past. So instead of design, so first of all, it's designed with with atomic precision. And then we don't control at all the assembly line. We don't really know what the cell is doing inside. So we're learning to use the power of biology to fabricate stuff in processes we don't fully understand, but it works. During the pandemic, I used to follow them on Twitter. These guys immediately would use this to make a COVID vaccine that worked very well, no side effects, and it got very quickly clinical trial approval in Korea, it was. So we are in a moment where we are starting to fabricate with nature at very low energy, in ways using the capacity of nature to create shapes without we being totally in control. And I think this is a theme that is happening in the 21st century. At the same time as artificial neural networks, and we talk about this in the end if I have time, started to become clever. When we lose control of the total rational process, so before when people were working in computational linguistics, they wanted control of the whole algorithm. In the moment we let the algorithm go loose, same as we are doing with biophysics in a way, when we let the biology work by itself, we are able to create things that we are not able to create when we only follow digital processes or logical processes. So I think we're going back to the big questions of the 20th century. And out of this story came even another interesting thing. So for many, many years, people have tried to cure cancer in this rational way. I find a drug, I kill the tumor, like I told you before. And somehow that works up to a point, but you all know tumors become resistant to the treatment, and nothing really works after a number of years, apart from a few liquid tumors and so on. So also Nobel Prizes given to many people working in immunotherapies, which is the idea that we can talk to the immune system and train the immune system to detect the tumor and kill it for us. A bit like I was saying before. We don't really know how the whole thing works, but if we manage to decode a bit the language in which we can talk to the immune system, we can get very good results. And immunotherapies are making massive strides in improving cancer treatment. And this is, immunotherapies these days and will evolve, is a mixture of computer science, physics, biology. All these things need to come together in order to do this work. Another example that you know are the COVID vaccines, which were made of a code of DNA that we knew was the spike protein as a way to talk to the immune system to recognize the virus, synthetic or not, but we just synthetically at least decoded. And it was put into a nanoparticle of lipids The physics to create this system had been developed over the last 30, 40 years. It's about putting channels, nanochannels of liquids, in which one liquid I put the lipid, in another liquid I put the DNA, and by knowing the fluid dynamics, controlling the turbulence, the fluid dynamics inside the thing, you can create nanoparticles where all of them are the same, more or less, and they have the same composition. This took decades of many people all over the world trying to design this, and of course there were physicists and engineers, and both companies, Moderna and BioNTech, licensed the same patent from this company who got it right. Anyway, just showing you how physics is mixing with all these other sciences to make all sorts of advances. But let's go back to where I started to the beginning. The idea that studying the physics of living systems, we're going to learn more about how to understand the world. Look at this. This is a plate of nano spaghetti, if you want. These little wires are nanowires of silver. And these nanowires of silver are interconnected in many, 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 many possible ways. So these guys from UCLA, Jim Jimsevsky, started to push electricity into this thing. And because you're so small, when you are at the nanoscale, and this is one of the keys of why biology and the world emerges at the nanoscale, is the electrical field is able to change your shape and change the connections. So what this guy did is started to put patterns of the traffic of Los Angeles, and then this thing starts changing shape. So it's the training. In the same way we train artificial neural networks, he was training a physical nanoscale system. So this system, after a while, became able to predict the patterns of traffic of Los Angeles. So here you see that embedded in matter at the nanoscale that is highly interconnected, and if you give it patterns that repeat in time, the thing changes its shape by minimizing energy and produces something that is able to predict the real world. And this is where we are now. I move you how physics is allowing us to go from the bottom up, from proteins to cells, to maybe neurons, to understand how biology processes information, and at the same time we make medicines and so on. But there is the other branch, which I told you a little bit at the beginning, neuroscience. A lot of physicists also have been working in neuroscience since the 1950s, since the 1960s. The last Nobel Prize in physics were given to Hopfield. Hopfield got the Nobel Prize because of the physics of artificial neural networks. And he got inspired by solid-state physics to try to make neural networks in this field that has evolved in parallel with neuroscience, computer science, and physics. So here's where we are now, making artificial neural networks, like these guys probably use for their data, that are trying to interpret the world, and we're bringing principles of physics and biology in this quest not only to make crazy pictures or hallucinations and crazy dialogues or to write reports and so on, but also, again, to understand the limits of logic, the limits of logical computation. One of the main problems that the current paradigm of technology has is that because we rely on digital computation, unlike my cell that is able to compute almost, remember the ATPS? Is able to produce energy almost out of nowhere because it's able to use shape, not just digital computations. We are also learning that AI is great, and I love it, but in order to power it, we don't have enough money. So basically, right now, the US in data centers and AI uses the same electricity as the whole city of New York. Amazon says it needs its own nuclear reactor. And last week, and this is an interesting event, or 2 weeks ago, China unveiled they managed to create the first thorium nuclear reactor. And in big part is to power AI. So this is something that is leading many of us of thinking other ways of computation. I'm going to go more quickly now, because all the problems we need to solve in the 21st century, which are plenty of problems, and are complexity problems. From energy to pandemics to global warming to materials, we need to create better with lower energy and in a way that we don't totally destroy the earth and hopefully will recover the environment. So we're in a very complicated situation, which on the one hand, we need computers more than ever, and we have more powers than ever to understand complex systems. But at the same time, we use too much energy for doing it. I think, although this looks like a bad thing, this is going to trigger a lot of very exciting research in the areas of energy, like we do fusion, nuclear fusion, the thorium reactors, and also in new ways of computation. As I told you before, biology does not only use digital. Biology is very clever at using physics, at using electricity, at using shape, the mystery of biological shape and geometry, to create very smart people or animals or plants that use very little energy. So this starts to be a little bit, I tell you about my work. So these days in my lab, I make real neural networks, not to create cyborgs, but to actually understand how they're able to compute with so little energy. And it's great, because as soon as you start doing these things, you start having ideas about the design of this system. And now out of that, we're thinking of new biosensors, things that can have in any other application. Another thing I'm interested in, and I'm starting to collaborate with people at Oxford, is this crazy interface I told you before between quantum and non-quantum, classical or general relativity, and biological systems. There's a lot of quantum effects in biology that have been proved, but I'm interested in trying to design experiments to see if there's quantum effects in neurons. And apart from clever neurons, I'm very interested in humble plants. I'm interested in plants and intelligence without neurons. And plants are great, not only turn to the sun when they need to turn. Did you know that they are able to imitate the shapes of other leaves? There are plants that are, if you put like leaves next to them with another shape, they're able to grow leaves with a shape. How do they see them? How they're able to do it? So plants are very intelligent. And I work in my lab trying to understand how they use energy and how they create their time. I didn't talk about this, but there's something really mysterious about being alive. So you do the step between quantum and classical. This is the stuff that was worrying Schrödinger. And it's the idea that in order to be alive, you need to decrease your entropy. We know entropy grows, and somehow we become very smart by decreasing our entropy. And we can do that because we can keep heating the environment. So we need to eat a lot in order to keep lower our entropy. Many computer scientists and many physicists think this is actually the origin of intelligence, because we need to accumulate all this information in our shape in order to become alive, and at the same time go into the world in order to get energy and to keep moving. So when we do that, when we decrease our entropy and we heat the world, time moves forward. We break the reversibility of time. And this is something I'm very interested to study in plants, how they perfectly control their shape by perfectly controlling how they dissipate energy at the nanoscale. Linking energy with information, with shape, is my deep quest, which probably I will not solve. And with my friends in Cambridge, we started a small company to study the capacity of molecules diffusing in 2 dimensions to create a quantum classical computer. how movement, energy dissipation can be used as a kind of molecular processor. So these are the kind of ideas that interest me. I finish on time. And you can make questions in this Slido thing, I think. Okay, finish here.
Questions coming through. Thank you. This is your time to ask your questions. I can tell when you're talking about AI, that starts to capture people's imagination. Do you believe that biophysics can aid AI in reducing its power consumption?
Yes. This is, so far, I think so, because biophysics is about learning the physical processes that make life possible. Not only the information process, but also the energy uses. So this is one of the things I'm trying to use to learn in my lab. How biology is able to use these non-digital processes in order to jump and go faster. Well, this is the whole idea of analog computing. But anyway, yes, we are working on that.
Excellent. To jump around a bit, what is your favorite physics problem?
This one. The emergence of, more than a problem, is a mystery that I find very interesting, is why the geometry of biology at the nanoscale. You know, why do we have all these symmetries and this yeah. So I think this is why I'm interested in this quantum classical interface, and I read a lot about all these theories of how I don't quite maybe believe so much in quantum gravity, but funnily enough, I'm interested in this problem, quantum biology, quantum gravity, yeah.
I think people are interested in kind of maybe the scalability of this. Like, do you think that the things that happen in your lab are going to affect kind of, are we going to use biological processes in our lives? Well, are there going to be factories making these things?
The mystery, there's another mystery. Why some ideas make it to the whole world and others, even they're very good, they don't, and all that. That's also a very interesting problem. But I do think now, I've been working on this all my life and nobody paid any attention. But now I have quite a few companies interested in some of my ideas. All across, from protein, from pharma to even a car company is becoming interested in my ideas. So maybe some of these ideas will make it to the world, yeah.
Somebody's asked, what is the current definition of complexity, or your definition?
This is a tricky thing. There's not a good definition of complexity. We talk about complex systems when there are many parts that are interconnected, and when you move one, the others respond sort of in loops, right? Feedback loops or feed-forward feed loops. But there's, there's no fundamental physics in this area so much. It's very practical, and we don't have these thresholds where we still can call a system complex. So, work in progress, I guess. Yeah.
Few people are interested in kind of the ethical side of things. They wonder, like, do you have any restrictions on what you do, or what are the dangers?
Yeah, many dangers, as you can imagine, because my nice neuron system could also be used as a brain interface. In the same way I can talk to my neurons, you can see this can be used for other uses. I have heard, for example, people are making earphones so they can at least get recordings of the brain waves, and then when you're looking at your phone, they are able to influence you. So we are in a very dangerous world. And especially with the geopolitical situation, if we don't do it, the Chinese will do it, and then it's going to be very difficult to stop. But yeah, we need massive transparency, I think, from scientists to speak very openly about the things we do, and also about the ethical risk. Of course, it's not just good that we can do things, but if we should do things. So that's why I do a lot of public talking as well. I think everyone should get involved in understanding what we're doing And hopefully we can have power in this world, which we don't have much power maybe to influence these things as citizens, but try to push all this for the good of everyone, not just a few. But this has always been the problem of science. Yeah.
A question about education, which is, I think, relevant here. Where would you like to see biophysics in education, or the way that we could be teaching young people to best reflect the world of research?
That's a big question. I think in modern science, because it's becoming so multidisciplinary, you need to know too much from many things. But I think the most successful people are still the ones that have a good physics education in the classical physics way of thinking, understanding to use your intuition to solve problems. And as you grow older, you get more into complex things. So at in Oxford Physics, we teach biophysics in the 4th year, and I think that's good enough. Even if you don't know any good biophysics, you can become a very good biophysicist in the end.
Do people move both from sort of biology into physics
No.
and physics into
and this is the great thing of a physics education. With a physics education, you can move across. You can do maths, you can, if you like, you can do engineering, you can move to computing, you can move to biology. The problem with biological education is a very practical degree that does not teach you how to think deeply into, like me, as this quantum. No, they just give them the recipes to, these things work. So for biologists, it's very difficult to come, although some do. I have very good biologists in my lab that become very good at physics. But I think biology education will probably change a lot in the coming years because of AI, because of data, because of all this. So we are in a moment where things will start to change, I think.
Popular question, how do I get better at physics?
For me, I became good at physics and this is funny, without any hesitation, I became myself. I was always trying to be like sort of others, like there was some kind of ability others had that I had to learn in order to do physics. And when I remove all that and I interiorize the problems inside of myself, I remember physically I feel the problems then clicked. Again, is this mystery of what is not logical in us, right? So embracing something, some of the students said the love of astrophysics. I think this is key. To feel the love of physics, of understanding the world with your intuition, then brings the logic out. So be yourself, I say.
Advice, thank you. And I think people are inspired. They're asking about careers and jobs and kind of,
careers
advice.
In this area or in general?
Yeah, in
this area, up to now, has a lot of career opportunities because there's interest in vaccine development, protein extraction prediction, medical field, also sensors. I know you know, and also in neuroscience, lots of interest in the brain. All this is very much, you can get jobs and many things. Instrument development for medical applications. I don't know if you know what happened in the US. There's a big cut in funding in biology in general, biomedical research in the US. This will have an influence, and I have a feeling that a lot of the work we're doing now will be starting to move towards national security. So all these sensors that we were developing before are now interesting for detecting potential bioweapons. So I think the world is changing, and the kind of jobs that we are going to be doing in 5 years might be very different from now. But certainly there are jobs in this area, and many startups in all sorts, from molecular computing, new materials, bio-inspired materials. I have a big EU grant to create, inspired by biology, materials for construction using AI to reduce the cost, the carbon emissions and the cost. And so my dream is to be able to build walls with cellulose. So, and construction companies were calling me to see if they were getting my expertise in biophysics to help them to create these materials. So there are many opportunities in this area, I think. Yeah.
You said that aspects of biology are beyond logic. If physics becomes beyond logic, will we face significant conceptual issues?
Physics is beyond logic. It always was. I mean, especially with quantum mechanics. This is why there's things you can bring. I've been rereading all the work of Hermann Weyl. Hermann Weyl was one of the theories that allow us to create the big successful theory of the standard model of particle physics. So it was amazing how he arrived to one of the most insightful physical concepts of the 20th century, this gauge theory. He didn't do it from reason and so on. His idea, he got the equations of quantum mechanics and turned them and tried to see the symmetry on it, right? And from there, he implied that forces or particles will come out of these symmetries. Amazing thing. So out of an idea, the universe could create matter and forces. And he was inspired, I mean, he was basically following German idealist philosophy about conscience. How an animal wants to, if you know if this is real, you look from here, you look from there, and if you see that with this symmetry transformation, this still is here and looks like that, I decide that this is real. So he used, and physics used very often things that are intuitions that are way beyond logic. And we jump them, and when we jump them is when we do this, when you do this science in mathematics, you put this integral, this mystery there. This is hiding the intuition of it. We cannot draw infinity, but you make an intuition into drawings, the path integrals, or all these diagrams of Feynman. We condense the intuition, the logic into mathematics, into drawings. So it's full of non-logic.
I think we've got imagination going on here as well. We're thinking about robots in the future, human-like robots, maybe space travel.
Yeah, well, we had a conference in Oxford 2 weeks ago where I invited Roger Penrose to talk about all these things of quantum. And I also invited this woman from Japan who is making robots, and she's trying to put in the robots and the capacity to read human emotions. She was very interesting because she did not want to make the robot conscious at all because she thought that was unsafe. This is very interesting, how ethics and reason go together. And what you want to do, ethical things, you have to steer away from things you cannot control. And yeah, I mean, so many people working in these areas and many physicists working and making robots, what is thinking, but all this reason, non-reason, all this is coming together in robots, yeah?
A practical question, who funds your experiments?
Who funds my experiments? Well, whoever I can. At the moment, UKRI, the research councils of the UK, and the European Union, and I get a little bit of money from Oxford, from the John Fell Fund in Oxford. And we are always applying for money, and I get all over. This is what we do in science, look for money.
Okay, here's the most popular question again. Going back to quantum effects in neurons, what effects would you most expect to see, and how might these be observed?
I think, it's very hard. We don't have techniques to go to deep quantum effects in living systems, but I expect to see, to detect that because they are able maybe to synchronize some kind of the computations through quantum, maybe some quantum effect, some coherence, some entanglement, very local, they will lower the energy of the processes. We are measuring some strange synchronizations of neurons at hundreds of megahertz that makes us very interested in how they might be using crystalline resonances inside some of the structures to synchronize something. But I don't think we will get a definite answer, but I think it's worth start building instruments to be able to answer this question. Yeah.
Thank you. And as one final question, what major advancements in biophysics do you hope to see in your lifetime?
I don't know. I think it would be great to understand what I just said, how we can make computations with very little energy. And also it would be great to demonstrate there's some quantum processes in plants or in neurons or whatever are mediating the way that, for example, a plant knows how to create their symmetries and the leaves coming exactly in the same way in different directions. Yeah, anyway. Yes, quantum.
Well, I'd just like to say, if you want to find out more about Sonia's work, then she's got Nano comes to life, so you can look out for that. And I'd like
and
to
a new book coming up.
Oh, nice. What's your new book?
I'm still not there yet. I'm finishing now. Problems that science cannot solve, which will include a lot of these ideas on quantum mechanics as well. Yeah.
Thank you. I think you've left us some big ideas, so thank you very much.